Live from London, this is BBC News. American officials say they believe Ukraine is ready to move forward in a ceasefire process with Russia ahead of talks in Saudi Arabia. Former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney wins the race to become Canada's Prime Minister and says his country will prevail in Donald Trump's trade war. China brings in a raft of new levies against US farm products as the tariff trade war intensifies. Israel says it's cut off electricity supplies to Gaza, which will affect Palestinians' access to clean water. North Korean hackers cash out hundreds of millions from a $1.5 billion Bybit hack. Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Catherine Biarahanga. Now it's the start of a big week of peace talks aiming to end the war in Ukraine. American officials say they believe Kyiv is ready to move forward in a ceasefire process with Russia ahead of talks in Saudi Arabia. President Zelensky will also travel there, although he won't be taking part in negotiations. Officials from Ukraine and the US will meet for the first time since the clash between their two leaders in the Oval Office. All of this comes as the Ukrainian military said that Russia launched 176 drones during an overnight strike. Our correspondent Thomas McGill reports.
A weekend of deadly attacks by an unrelenting Russia. This is the Donetsk region in the east where 11 people were killed and 40 wounded, including 6 children, according to Ukrainian officials. Attacks like this have intensified across the country in recent days, this one in Odessa in the south, after the US paused military aid, intelligence sharing and now some satellite imagery. Despite this, the US is determined to forge ahead with talks in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday and says they believe Ukraine's leader is ready to move forward with its demand for a ceasefire. President Zelensky will not attend the talks personally, but will meet the Saudi leader Mohammed bin Salman today. Senior US officials, led by the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, will then meet a delegate from Ukraine on Tuesday to discuss the terms of a potential truce.
I'm confident that the meeting will be productive. We in Ukraine are committed to this. We are very much so. We will do our best to ensure that Ukrainian interests are taken into account in the right way.
Ahead of the talks and speaking on Fox News, President Trump described the war as a mess.
Are you comfortable with that? The fact that you walked away and Ukraine may not survive?
Well, it may not survive anyway, but, we have some weaknesses with Russia. It takes two. Look. It was not going to happen, that war, and it happened. So now we're stuck with this mess.
But just a few hours ago, he suggested the US is easing its pause on sharing military intelligence.
We want to do anything we can to get Ukraine to be serious about getting something done.
You haven't been alone. We gave you
The relationship between America and Ukraine remains fragile after a heated exchange in the White House earlier this month. And Europe has also come under fire from President Trump, who wants it to step up and spend more on defence. The UK has already committed to increasing its spending on defence and said it's willing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine. But what's not clear is how many other European countries could join a so-called coalition of the willing. The US knows Ukraine is coming to these latest talks on the back foot. And if progress towards peace is to be made, then compromise will also be needed. Thomas McGill, BBC News.
And ahead of tomorrow's crucial talks with the US in Saudi Arabia, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says yet again that he wants peace. He wrote on social media, Ukraine has been striving for peace since the first second of the war, and we've always said that the only reason why the war is still going on is Russia. Our State Department correspondent Tom Bateman is travelling to Saudi Arabia with the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. During a fuel stop in Ireland, he sent us this update.
Well, my sense is this is very much about the Trump administration seeing if the Ukrainians are ready to do what President Trump wants. One senior State Department official saying that the meeting in Jeddah on Tuesday will allow them to assess whether the Ukrainians are, in their words, ready to move forward with that demand for a quick ceasefire with Moscow. Remember, the US president wants Mr. Zelensky to sign up to a process towards a truce, but without any immediate guarantee of a US security guarantee for Ukraine in the event that Russia would violate that ceasefire. That's the thing that Mr. Zelensky has always pushed back against. Now, he is going to be in Saudi Arabia, but as far as we know, he won't be meeting Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and Mike Waltz, the White House National Security Advisor, there tomorrow, leaving that instead to his senior officials to talk to them. But this comes after 10 days of arm-wrenching, of intense pressure by Mr. Trump on Mr. Zelensky, basically to get on board with that process. So I don't get the sense that anything will necessarily be signed at the end of the day tomorrow. This is much more about the Americans sort of scoping out, being able to report back to Mr. Trump as to where the Ukrainians are at. In the meantime, remember though that this deep fracture in the Western alliance has seen Russia intensify its bombardment of Ukraine.
Tom Bateman travelling with Marco Rubio there. Russia has ordered the expulsion of 2 Britons it accuses of spying. The 2 men, a diplomat and the spouse of another diplomat, are accused of intelligence and subversive work and ordered to leave the country within 2 weeks. The UK Foreign Office described the accusations as baseless and malicious. Well, with me now is our diplomatic correspondent, James Landell. And James, just tell us a bit more about what's happened here.
Well, this is just part of a latest round of pretty tense relations between the UK and Russia on the diplomatic front. What the Russians have done is they have identified 2 mid-ranking diplomats at the embassy, and they have given these 2 people, they basically suspended these people's credentials. They've been given a couple of weeks to leave the country. And as you say, the Russians accuse them, A, of providing false information on their visas and application forms when they arrived in Russia, and secondly, showing, quote, signs of intelligence and subversive activity, which can, mean a number of things. At the same time, the Russian authorities have summoned what they call a British representative from the embassy to express their concerns. And as you say, the Foreign Office in response has said very explicitly this is not the first time that Russia has made what they call malicious and baseless accusations against their staff. So that's what's happened. This comes after, in February, the UK expelled a Russian diplomat. In November, Russia expelled a British diplomat. So this is part of a cycle of tit for tat. The question, of course, is whether there are any wider significance to this. And
just answer that question for us. How much does this matter in terms of the relationship between the UK and Russia?
Well, look, obviously, things are tense at the moment because of the situation and the diplomatic circumstances around Ukraine at the moment. But clearly, there are a number of things. The UK is supporting Ukraine at the moment. The Russians do not like that. At the moment, in recent weeks, the British government has been leading an attempt to form a coalition of the willing, as it's called, to provide security guarantees for Ukraine in any post-war scenario. So to that extent, the UK is more to the fore. There's also been, as we've been reporting last week, this court case in the UK where 3 Bulgarians were jailed for their role in a Russian intelligence operation here in the UK. So there are all manner of potential other issues that the Russians might be willing to push back against. But at the moment, that is just speculation. At the moment, the Russians are very explicitly tying it to a specific, the specific behaviour of these 2 diplomats. But as we say, the British government says those accusations are baseless.
And James, before you go, of course, I have to ask you about those wider diplomatic conversations, talks that we're expecting to see in Saudi Arabia this week. Of course, Russia will be the major focus of those discussions. Just give us a sense of how you think this week will be significant in those efforts to end the war.
We're going to have lots of weeks like this, I think. This is the latest round. The crucial point is this. We know quite a lot about where the Ukrainians are on their wishes. They've made it very clear, they want to have a temporary truce in the air, in the sea, to try and put some pressure on the Russians. Say, well, look, this is what we're prepared to do. What are you prepared to do? So that in an attempt to try and get the Americans to start asking questions of the Russians rather than just putting all the pressure on the Ukrainians. At the moment, the Russians are saying very little, but what they are saying is, well, let's just wait and see what the Americans are saying. And that is unclear at the moment. We are unclear as to how much more pressure the Americans are going to put on the Ukrainians, because there have been reports over the weekend that even if the Ukrainians agree a minerals deal to share mineral development with the United States, that in itself may not be enough for the Americans to say, OK, we're going to lift our pause on military aid and intelligence. So there's a lot more to find out about where the Americans actually stand on it. There are lots of contradictory noises, but it's really important this week.
Thank you. As ever, that's our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale. Thank you. Next to Canada, where the former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has won the race to succeed Justin Trudeau as the next Prime Minister. Mr. Carney received a resounding 85% of the vote to be elected as the new leader of Canada's governing Liberal Party. Thanking his supporters, he said he would ensure the party continue to stand for fiscal responsibility, social justice and international leadership.
These are dark days. Dark days brought on by a country we can no longer trust. We are getting over the shock. But let us never forget the lessons. We have to look after ourselves. And we have to look out for each other. We need to pull together.
And our correspondent John Sudworth was there in Ottawa, where Mr. Carney's victory was announced.
Well, this was a thumping victory for Mark Carney. We saw him on the stage here accepting the leadership of the party, and of course by default he will soon be Canada's next Prime Minister. It's an extraordinary result for the central banker, who, despite having a lot of leadership experience, of course, has very little political experience. But politics in this country has been turned on its head in recent weeks, largely because of what's been happening on the other side of its southern border, with Mr. Trump launching attacks on this country's economy with the trade war, and also saying that he wants to make Canada the 51st state of America. That is something Mr. Carney said he would never allow to happen. You can see the assembled ranks of the media behind me with their studios built there. The anticipation across the board is that Mark Carney will now call an early general election in an attempt to make his leadership of this country his own. He still faces an uphill struggle. The Conservatives are leading in the polls, but that gap has been narrowing dramatically recently because of that geopolitical dynamic. A party that once seemed tired after 3 terms in office and facing mounting public anger over the cost of living suddenly feels very optimistic. And this upcoming election will be one that is just as much about sovereignty as it is the economy. And that is in large part because of President Trump.
John Sudworth with that report there. In a further escalation of tensions between the world's 2 leading economies, China has imposed retaliatory tariffs on certain US agricultural goods. US products like chicken, beef and wheat will now face higher taxes. Beijing says their response to President Trump's doubling of the rate on all Chinese imports to the US to 20%. Our China correspondent Steve McDonnell has more.
So in response to the Trump administration's tariffs on all Chinese goods, Beijing has placed either 10 or 15% tariffs on a whole swathe of US agricultural goods. Why go for US agricultural goods? Because this is Donald Trump's base. These are the farmers who, many of whom voted for Donald Trump. Now, President Trump says to them, oh, no worries, you can sell more stuff inside the US. Well, I'm sure they'd also like to sell more cotton and sorghum and chicken and pork into this massive market. And in another development over the last 24 hours, Beijing has also said it's placing tariffs on Canadian agricultural products. Now, this is in response to Canada's tariffs on Chinese electrical goods, on electric cars. And so analysts looking at this will tell you all of this is going to hurt global trade and in the end is going to mean really that consumers are the ones paying more for all sorts of goods as a result of this unfolding trade war.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Israel says it's cut off electricity supplies to Gaza, which will affect Palestinians' access to clean water. It comes just days after Israel blocked all humanitarian aid into the territory, a move condemned by the UN and aid organisations. Meanwhile, Israel is due to send negotiators to Qatar for a new round of talks on extending the fragile ceasefire in Gaza. Our Middle East correspondent Yolande Knell told us what to expect from the talks.
Well, this does look like a concerted effort to broker some kind of new ceasefire and hostage release agreement between Israel and Hamas. You have got both sides sending their negotiating teams to Qatar to meet regional mediators, and President Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff is also expected in Doha later this week. Of course, the first stage of the original Gaza ceasefire deal ended at the start of this month, and since then things have looked really stuck. Hamas has been insisting that the deal must move on to its next phase that could see a full end to fighting in Gaza. Israel, meanwhile, has only wanted to talk about extending the truce so that you'd have more of the remaining hostages in Gaza returning home. And it's thought that Hamas continues to hold 24 hostages who are alive, as well as the bodies of 35 others. And then we've got this development, more than a week ago, Israel cutting off all humanitarian supplies going into Gaza, saying that that was to pressure Hamas. Now what it's done is to cut the electricity going to a desalination plant in the center of the Gaza Strip that was providing clean drinking water. Critics say that this amounts to collective punishment.
Meanwhile, there are growing fears that Syria stands on the edge of a return to widespread violence after days of sectarian bloodshed that one human rights group estimates killed at least 1,000 people. The country's interim leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, has appealed for unity in what is the worst period of unrest since he took control last December, having ousted the longtime president Bashar al-Assad. The worst violence has been around the port city of Latakia, and began when gunmen from the minority Alawite community loyal to the former president attacked the new security forces. Their response has been brutal. The US and Russia have called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council to discuss the crisis. From Damascus, here's Lina Sinjab.
There are, speedy efforts by the official authorities here and the official army and security to control the situation after a terrible bloodshed that shook the country, especially against the minorities of civilians from the Alawite minority. The interim president Ahmed al-Shara vowed to stop any remnants of the Assad regime and bring them to justice, but also said that they will not tolerate anyone affiliated to the government who conducted any violations and any attack against civilians, and that all will be brought to justice. The task is very difficult and very, challenging. There are, jihadists among the fighters who came with him to Damascus. There are foreign fighters. How is he going to treat them? How is he going to bring them to justice? That's going to be a big challenge at a time where remnants of the Assad regime are trying, hard to destabilize the situation inside Syria. They are members of the Alawites. They are members of the security forces and the army who conducted crimes against thousands of Syrians during the rule of Bashar al-Assad. They don't want to be prosecuted or brought to justice because they have blood on their hands, and they have a vested interest in spreading fear among the minorities, in destabilizing the security of the country and keep the blood shed cycle going on. Even not only in the coastal sides. Yesterday here in Damascus, in some areas where some of the Alawites community are based, there were clashes heard and some shooting heard. We don't have any confirmed information about any injuries, but that shows you the scale of the challenge ahead of this government, which by itself, is accused of having, its own jihadist history. The interim president Ahmed al-Shara led Hayat Tahrir al-Sham for years. It was affiliated to Al-Qaeda. So everyone, whether internally, is looking, with caution about what he's going to do, and also the international community is looking with caution on how he's going to manage in a way to protect all Syrians of all sects and all minorities.
Lina Sinjab reporting there. To the world's biggest cyber heist now. Hackers thought to be working for the North Korean regime have successfully cashed out much of their record-breaking $1.5 billion crypto haul. The criminals, known as Lazarus Group, swiped the huge stash of digital tokens in an audacious and remarkable hack on the crypto exchange Bybit last month. Our cyber correspondent Joe Tidy reports.
Sound check, technical check. Are we live?
This is Ben Zhao, CEO and founder of the Bybit cryptocurrency exchange. He's about to make an announcement that every CEO dreads.
About 2 hours ago, Bybit experienced a hack. As far as we know, this could be the largest hack in the history of our industry.
In fact, it's probably the biggest single theft in any industry ever. $1.5 billion gone in seconds. And even in the early hours after the hack, fingers began immediately pointing in one direction: North Korea. The impoverished country has one of the most advanced cyber teams in the world and is blamed for a growing list of massive, lucrative cyber attacks.
They don't have a successful industry for anything, so they created a successful industry for hacking. And they don't care about the negative impression of cybercrime.
They have been around for at least 15 years doing this. They have been very involved in a variety of large attacks over the years. And what they'll do with that money is they use it to fund their military missile programs.
The Bybit heist dwarfs all previous financial hacks. So how was it pulled off? Like all crypto exchanges, Bybit has a float of crypto coins ready to be sold and swapped in so-called hot wallets. When the hot wallet's running low, more crypto coins are taken out of a huge reserve pot, kept in a super secure digital wallet offline, and therefore safe from hackers. But the cybercriminals know this, so they targeted a company called SafeWallet that Bybit uses to transfer coins from its cold wallets. Everything looked normal for Bybit as they set up the mega transfer of Ethereum coins to the usual place. But the hackers had secretly changed the address that the coins were being sent to. Everything was verified and the send button was clicked. By the time they realized the coins had been sent to the criminals, it was too late. Bybit confirmed the theft and insisted that no customers would lose money. But now the company is, in its words, waging war on the hackers. They're offering bounties to anyone who can help track the stolen money as the hackers try and cash it out through crypto exchanges. So far, 20 volunteers have been awarded a share of $4 million, but they're up against a skilled adversary.
So here we have Bybit, the exchange, and this represents the theft of funds.
Crypto investigators Elliptic have been tracking the money since it was stolen.
And you can see the funds subsequently being fanned out across very many different transactions. So what they're trying to do here is to confuse the money trail, make it more difficult to follow the funds and potentially seize them.
An explosion of crypto in different directions, isn't it?
They are extremely sophisticated in what they're doing here. Out of all the illicit actors involved in cryptocurrency, North Korea really are the best at laundering crypto.
For years now, the US and allies have accused the country of orchestrating cybercrime. Names and photos of alleged North Korean hackers have been added to a Cyber Most Wanted list. But unless they leave the country, the chances of them being arrested are slim. Joe Tidy, BBC News.
And finally, a whippet called Miuccia has been crowned Best in Show at this year's Crafts. The 4-year-old from Venice beat more than 18,000 dogs from around the world, becoming the first dog from Italy to win the coveted top prize. The runner-up was Viking, a Tibetan Mastiff from Romania. You're watching BBC News.